Good evening, viewers, and welcome to our show, Conversations. We've decided that coming out of this lockdown as we move forward, we're going to continue bringing these very insightful discussions with people who are part of our public life. These are people who are thoughtful, who have a sense of what the world is, they have the experience to tell you what life is all about. So I'm choosing these guests with, very carefully. People who I think who I've dealt with in the past and I know will bring some light to your life. They'll give you advice, they'll give you guidance on how they've dealt with things and how they've moved forward to, bring happiness to their lives. I'm joined today by a very special guest, Kabir Bedi. Kabir, I respect him greatly. We are very good friends as well. We've spent time together in the past. Kabir, welcome to the show. First, let me.
Good to be with you.
Thanks, Kabir. First, let's start by, how has this lockdown been for you? How have you spent your time?
It's been a time when I felt very sorry for the way the world has changed. I felt sorry for the people who suffered. I mourn for those who died. But I have made the best use of lockdown. I've done some serious writing. I've managed to complete my book, sort of a book of autobiographical stories, which I've been attempting off and on for many years now. And I just didn't have the clarity or the follow through or too many distractions or whatever. I just used this time to focus, rise early, write for hours, finally done. And I'm very happy. It should be out by the end of the year, I hope. But I'm very happy with the book and I'm very proud of what I've written. And I've really made the best use of this lockdown.
Coming out of this lockdown, as we've, seen things unfold, there has been a tremendous amount of turmoil in the world, unexpected. I thought we are going into this pandemic as a world community together, but nations have clashed, civilizations have clashed, and we've been concentrating on many other things beyond just the pandemic. We were supposed to find this pandemic together. Are you surprised on how this has unfolded?
Well, it's a time where it's one of those inflection points, what they call the black swan event in stock markets. Something comes along and turns your world completely upside down. We never ever, and a whole new world is born, because the old world has changed and died in so many ways. So we are looking at this in a wholly different way. And I think we're dealing with this incredible virus that just attacks human beings. I mean, why does the COVID? It's just targeting human beings as far as we know. And we have to change the way we live, commute, work, think, relate to each other. And it's tourists go to a foreign country and see strange sights and sounds and smells and everything else. They get an overdose of that, then they go back to their own countries. So there's kind of, oh God, we can now digest it in our normalcy. There is no good future show. You just have to live in a whole new world. There's no going back. So we have to adjust. And really, in a sense, the species is under attack. And as Einstein said, the species that survive is not the species that is the strongest or even the most intelligent. It's the species that learns to adapt. So we have to learn to adapt to all these things that have changed around us in our lives in our cities, in our country, and overall in the world. This is all kinds of implications which you don't even know right now. But when something like this changes, everything changes. It's like when you play chess, even if you move one piece on the chessboard, all the relationships of the pieces change. So this one event will change all the relationships between all the powers, all the economies, for better or for worse is to be seen. But it will change everything. We're in the middle of a colossal change, and we better get used to the fact that we're not going to go back to the good old days. We have to get used to the brave new world and hope that we make a better world out of it somehow by taking advantage of the opportunities that come, minimizing the bad. You know, there's a saying in English which says, it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. It's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. You imagine this means bad ever benefits from it. In fact, it means the opposite in a typically perverse English way. It's an ill wind that blows nobody any good, which means somebody somewhere always benefits from it.
Right. No, absolutely. And, so tell me the one good out of it, which you think, which has happened for the world with this.
What is the good?
Yeah.
Let's start with the personal. Suddenly, you have more time to do other things. You are shaken out of a routine. Suddenly, there's time to read. There's time to think. There's time to spend with family. Less social distractions. Entertainment calling you all over the place. So it's an opportunity to relook at yourself, look within, rather than constantly look outside. So that, I think, is the first and biggest takeaway and benefit of this lockdown. Secondly, I think it is accelerating the whole process of digitization. People that didn't have apps that or the UPI payments, all these people have tuned in. They found a new reason to go online. The subscriptions of OTT television channels have boomed. People are watching more news. People are consuming news, views, and relating to the digital world. They're involving. What would we do if the digital? So, in a sense, we are fortunate that this has come at a time when all things that the digital world has created, including e-commerce deliveries and communication by social media, communication by phones, by apps, etc. All this is at our fingertips. So we're not as has a digital revolution never occurred, and therefore we have accelerated that digital revolution. So that's the second good thing about it. Beyond that, I think people have become very aware of their on certain things, whether it's imports or whether it's goods that they normally wanted, can't get. People have learned to adapt and adjust the priorities of their lives and what they need for themselves. That's another big takeaway from this. But like I said, I think the biggest takeaway is the ability to reprioritize things in your life, make use of a time in a different way. Because what happens is we are creatures of habit.
Right.
So the train tracks and you keep thundering it down that line, and suddenly the train stops and there's a fork in the road, and there's many ways you can go. Those are your points of power, actually. It gives you an ability to relook at life and say, okay, if I choose that, what might happen? If I choose that, what might happen? And then you find, you make a choice, and suddenly your life is on a different set of tracks. We have a different set of tracks. So the ability to rethink your life and re-plan your future, I think, is one of the great gifts of this lockdown.
Kabir, I really take your point in that. And I think it's given people time to even enjoy the core companionship of their relationships at many, many levels. You know,
Absolutely.
otherwise, a lot of people outside took that time. Either you realize that this core relationship works, or you may also realize this core relationship doesn't work. There is no distraction left to, spend the time somewhere else and come back. Here,
You're gonna have
we're
lots of
locked in
babies or
24/7.
divorces too.
Sorry?
I said at the end of the lockdown, you're going to have lots more divorces and or babies. One of the
Yes.
two.
Well, either or even just understanding that how much value there is to the quality of life that you enjoy yourself within your four walls of your home. And I think that is something that it's a takeaway for all of us. I think we begin realizing what really we value, truly value. And when you're by yourself, what do you need to do to keep yourselves entertained, keep yourselves busy? How do you keep your mind productive? How solid your mind needs to be if you're basically locked in a jail for 5 months and you spend most of your time inside. Then how do you stay solid? No longer the confines of jails have become the only places where you send people away. The home can
Yeah.
become a jail, or the home's your heaven, whatever you want it to be.
It's a beautiful jail to have because you have, you're looked after. There's people, there's food on the table. The temperature is the way you want it. It's a very beautiful jail to be in, as jails
Absolutely.
go.
Yeah,
And
we're
I think
very,
we should
very
welcome it.
lucky, and I must say that as well. We're very, very lucky. And like you said in the beginning, there were a lot of people out there who were suffering. And I think it's also time to reevaluate how do we need to build the nations we live in and the world we live in, and how do we, make sure the balance exists for them to, be. What is the one thing that you think coming out of this lockdown, and this coming out of this lockdown is also gonna last a long time. But what is that one thing you think which was not so good that we learned out of the whole pandemic and the world?
The biggest tragedy that I've seen in this is people's refusal to take precautions and measures. Even today, there's the biggest spike ever. You go on the streets, you'll find 1/3 of the people are not wearing masks. It's one of those things where you give this thing to yourself. COVID doesn't come, it may come from elsewhere, but it's only you have to put it in your nose, mouth, etc. Only you can give it to yourself. So if you can't take the basic precaution for yourself, for the sake of others, etc., then that to me is a really sad commentary on your sense of being a human being, because you're talking about human beings and lives at risks. And I think people, should actually go up to people on the street and say, why aren't you wearing masks? Why aren't you wearing masks? Lecture people. Don't wait for the police to come and find them. Go up to them and take the initiative and say, why aren't you wearing masks? You're endangering everybody. Shame people into wearing masks. Scientific sense in so many people that I see around me.
Human
Beyond that,
responsibility of social and being socially responsible, is that the point you're trying to make?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm a great individualist. I am a great contrarian. I don't accept the norm very easily, but certain things you absolutely have to. We all agree to drive on the left-hand side of the road in India because it's safer for all,
Right.
And in the same way, you've got to accept that you must wear a mask and don't rush around hugging and touching people because that's the only way to beat this. And yet the cases keep multiplying. I realize that, at places where people are living in crowded environments, etc., it's not that easy, but people just get careless. They think it's not going to happen to them.
Yeah.
But anyway, I hope that at some point common sense takes over and this whole wildfire spread of this virus stops, because it's really doing a lot of damage. More lives of people. I mean, the migrant labor crisis is one of the biggest crises that we've had. The the devastation caused to small businesses, to restaurants, to hotels, to shopkeepers. I mean, it's enormous. And this is what hurts me the most, the economic devastation that has been caused by this lockdown. So lack of social responsibility of many and the wrecking of so many lives that had running businesses, everything was going fine, or it was manageable, or it was prosperous, and suddenly there's a new dark cloud that's covered their lives. And, you know, we in India have an enormous capacity to accept pain, second to none in the world. But there comes a point where you can't manage after a certain point. You can borrow from family, you can borrow from friends, you can dip into your savings, you can sell a bit of gold, you can do for a while. And then there comes a point when it's a question of food may not be there on the table, and people will get very angry. And what I fear is social unrest. I fear social unrest born of unemployment and hunger. And I know the government is trying its best to alleviate that. But the fact of the matter is, at the ground level, a lot of their schemes are not reaching people. You know, this is the time when the whole world is, or every country in the world is spending the demand in the economy. Here we have a situation where the finance ministry is withholding funds on a number of things. My daughter's starting an e-business. She's inundated with all the regulations she has to do. Those things at the ground level of functioning have not cleared up as fast. Now, it is possible that this, when a crisis comes, people sit up and take notice. And hopefully that's what the government will do, because I'm a supporter of Prime Minister Modi. I believe in his vision. I believe his heart is in the right place. I think he wants the right things for India. He's a very dynamic man. And I hope that his vision gets translated down through the bureaucracy that's actually implemented. Because I think there's a lot of lethargy in the business. Yeah. And, I would like to see the judicial system of India transformed. Think of all the land that's locked up in dispute. Just releasing that would release so much money into the economy, so much activity into the economy. When you talk about India's problems, you can go on, because they're huge. Every country has its problems. India has its share of them, but these are solvable problems. And
absolutely,
it's always wonderful why, with so many great ministers of justice and so many great chief justices, the court system in India is so inefficient, slow, and 20 years for a land case on the average. Inexcusable. It makes absolutely no sense. Treat it as a national emergency. Empower more judges, create more courts, whatever it takes, it can be done. And these are things that create employment, they create prosperity, they create well-being for people. And these are things that should be done.
Kabir, can I weigh in slightly on this? And I think you were making a very, very good, solid point. And one of the things, when a lot of people voted Prime Minister Modi in, this is where the expectation was that they will go beyond the mundane way of doing things, which was happening for the last many years, right? People were tired of the system there was. It was the same tiredness that people, when they voted, for example, Obama in, they thought they're going to change a lot of the world. And similarly, when Indians voted for the BJP and they voted for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they looked at the Gujarat model and they said he'd done things more efficiently. I'm not so sure all of the Gujarat model, but some part of it at least, in terms of the financial successes in organization, and they thought he'd be able to take that and implement it across. But I guess Prime Minister Modi has had his own challenges in trying to implement it through the bureaucratic system, if you want to call it that, and then beyond the judiciary. The judicial system is a quagmire, if I want to call it that. It's a little bit of a
Yeah.
vicious quagmire. And courts just function entirely on their own system. It is a very, very corrupt system. The halls that are filled with these lawyers, uneducated, most of them, not really in control of the law, not tested enough to know whether they're capable of practicing the law. And then beyond that, do not have the ethos of what a lawyer's job is. And I think that's where a lot of the change needs to come. But this change will have to really be, like you said, it needs to be treated like an emergency as we move forward to deal with it. I want to pick back on one of the points that you made. You're a contrarian. Tell me a bit around the idea of the contrarian. When you say you're a contrarian, how do you look the world that you see around you, especially you're sitting in Mumbai today? There is a lot going on, and the world, and especially India, is almost focused on Mumbai right now. What is the contrarian view you have around what's unfolding there right now?
Rohit, I grew up with very unusual parents. My mother was a Gandhian Satyagrahi. She was handpicked by Gandhi. She searched for religion. She eventually became a Tibetan Buddhist nun. She rose to the highest ranks a woman can rise to as a nun. My father was from the Sikh tradition, descendant of Guru Baba Nanak. He had his own philosophy. He went and created a whole philosophy of his own in Italy and India. So I'm saying, my mother's saying one thing, my father's saying another thing. They're both good people. Where is the truth in this? Who's got the truth? One religion talks about rebirth, another talks about one birth. Somebody says there's a soul, somebody says there's no soul, somebody says there's karma, somebody says there's destiny, somebody says there's... In my schools, I studied in a school in Kashmir. Then I came to Delhi as in Delhi public school. Then I was sent to Shantiniketan, Tagore's school, because my parents felt that my Indian roots need to be watered. And yes, they were. It was very beautiful. It was Rabindra Sangeet and classes under the trees and people sitting eating off thalis on the floor in these beautiful halls. The pride in wearing Indian clothes. It was wonderful. But what I realized, even at that young age as a student in Shantiniketan, was that here I avoid blazers and ties and polished shoes and standing to attention, and these people in Shantiniketan are floating around and there's a different atmosphere. I realized everyone is conditioned by systems they're brought up in. We are all conditioned. We are all given beliefs at birth, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Everyone doesn't have to think about philosophy or where it all came from or what's the truth. Religion gives you a sense of belonging. It gives you a sense of community. It gives you a sense of beliefs. It gives you wonderful festivals. It gives you the rites of passage. So I'm not knocking traditional religion or traditional belief systems. But for me, there was always a question of, don't accept the norm. There is always something that can be another norm. What is the best norm for me? I don't think there's a lot of percentage in being normal. Creative people are not normal people. Creative people are different all the time. And that's been my drive, it's been my motive to always be different, try something different. I mean, when I set off from India and created a career on 3 continents in Europe and America, etc., I was doing something nobody had done before, going from Bollywood and create a whole international career abroad and then come back to Bollywood. All these are stories in my book, but how I did it, what I did, the mistakes I made, the successes I had, all that's there. But what for me was a search for value systems, a search for systems to live by, think by, believe in, try to find out what the truth is, and don't accept the norm. Don't accept what's given to you as the gospel truth. You have to find your own truth. That's why I call myself a bit of a contrarian.
That's a very good point. Kabir, you have a very interesting history, and especially, how your parents met. And if you don't mind, I may, take a little
Sure.
page out of what you told me once about your dad being in the university and how they left the university and they went to Germany. Tell me a bit about what a struggle it was for your dad, as he studied in England, and what that journey was, and they made it to being at the highest level of what they were doing at those times. Explain to me, what was the struggle like for an Indian to go in those years overseas?
But my father went to Oxford on a scholarship. My mother, who's English by birth, came to Oxford on a scholarship, and they met there. And they shared a certain idealism, a desire to change the world, a desire to minimize the suffering, to think about the poor, to think about the dispossessed, and also the cause of India's freedom. And when my father proposed to my mother, he said, "Will you please marry me? I love you. I want you in my life. We think the same thoughts, but I can't promise you any security. You'll probably spend the rest of your life sitting outside jails waiting for me to come out." Uh, and she said, "No, whatever it is, we'll face it together." It's not that she didn't love England. She loved England deeply, but she hated colonialism. She couldn't stand the exploitation of people and nations. So she joined him, and then they went to Berlin, because my father got a scholarship from the university that called the Humboldt University, which was a very left-wing university. But that was the time when Hitler came to power. And being a leftist and a mixed race couple in Germany in the 33, 34 was not a very comfortable place to be. So they tried to live as unobtrusively as possible. But then they met Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, and the great friendship developed there. Then they went to Indore, and they had this place in Lahore called the Huts, which were actual huts, because A, they didn't have a lot of money, but B, they wanted to show solidarity with India's poor. And in these huts, all these revolutionaries and freedom fighters from I.K. Gujral to Gyani Zail Singh to Satish Gujral to Hafiz Jalandhari, who is now the poet laureate of Pakistan, to any number of people would come. This would be their adda, etc. And then this was their political life. And then, of course, they went up to Kashmir, and there was a whole thing in Kashmir where my father wrote the constitution, my mother helped the refugees, etc. But beyond it, they entered a spiritual realm. And the amazing thing about this relationship, which I've written about in my book, is although their paths differed spiritually, yet they always remained bonded with each other in some way, each supporting the other, while each was totally different. My mother becomes the highest ranking Tibetan Buddhist nun in the world. My father becomes one of the most acclaimed philosophers in field. And yet there was togetherness between them, which the nature of it changed over the years. But they were soulmates to the end of their incredible lives.
Oh, what a lovely story, Kabir. Always a pleasure to listen to it. And I wanted to share it with the audience as well, in terms of the texturing and the life that you lead and what you go through in life and where you end up. It kind of makes you, realize that how important it is to find that companion in your life that you can, spend your life with and you feel the bonding with to the end of time. Kabir, now, what I see happening in Bombay, the world is, in a mess, if I want to call it that. There is barely any food. The economic situation is bad. We know that the vaccine's still a year away at least. And this is going to continue going on, the pandemic. But what we see the whole media concentrating on is the death of a movie star, and then all the
Shame.
drama around it. When you're thinking, man, if at least that's what I believe. When you look at this, what do you think? Is the world gone crazy? I'm sorry, but what's going on?
What's going on is that some channels I've just decided to sensationalize things. They're not talking about news anymore. They're talking about sensationalism. It's a sort of Jerry Springerization of news. It's the sensational accusations, trials by media. They're not competing with the other news channels. They're competing with the entertainment channels because what they're providing is entertainment. It's kangaroo courts. Because I can understand the concern about an actor's suicide, questions about whether it's a death or not. I can understand this being a subject that is talked about for a few days, but for 3 months non-stop, a whole bunch of channels are focusing almost exclusively on that. Meanwhile, right now there are 2 million acres of forests are burning in California. Another 4 million acres are burning in Siberia. Do you realize the consequences of global climate and heat and smoke do to our lives? That's not news. Migrant labor that's across the country, unemployed, getting increasingly desperate, that's not news enough. The floods that happen, that's not news enough. It's the death of an actor is all important. And I'm saying, wait a minute, this is not news. At the same time, I will say there are some channels that do have kept their integrity, have kept serious news alive. But I'd say of the 8 English channels, at least 4 have gone completely into sensationalism and feeding off this. And this witch hunt of this girl, first they tried to prove she murdered him. Then they've done her for smoking a few doobies, and she says she doesn't even smoke, so I don't know what the truth is. But the fact of the matter is, all kinds of extraneous matters have been done. This has become like a long-running soap opera, is what it's become. It's not news. It's sensational soap opera. And they should stop calling themselves news channels. They should just call themselves something else. Because to call themselves news channels, they give journalists a bad name.
They do.
There are a number of great journalists in this country. And there are a number of wonderful channels also here. But I feel we've lost our... we've been sort of waylaid by this distraction caused by sensationalism.
In the 90s, I don't know if you remember, in the US, they realized producing news had become a very expensive task. And I'm sure we've had this conversation before. It was so expensive. It costed about $1,500 to produce 1 minute of serious news. But then they looked at these car chases that were happening around the city, and they said having one helicopter and a camera running after it can basically take over a whole day and capture audience. And the responsibility also lies with the audience at many levels. And I must, transfer some of that responsibility to the audience as well. They were looking for drama. They were looking for entertainment. And they looked at news. It was free of cost coming on your channels. You weren't having to pay for it. And they said, this is cheap entertainment. It changes every day. And so they were watching these car chases every day on television channels, and it was the cheapest thing to produce. And so the channel said, great opportunity. Similarly, I think Indian news business had crashed entirely. And the very fact that they started following and creating a soap opera out of it made news almost like entertainment channels, sellable. Advertising jumped up, numbers jumped up. And so channels who continue to say that TRP is the only thing that's important to us, why isn't TRP important to us? I think are leaving away their social responsibility of what news is. And I think that's where one of the challenges lies. And I think you'd agree with me when I say that news should be, there should be a body that possibly needs to approve a news channel. And if you go off that, there needs to be an independent body, not just voted by the community, but by a larger group of people of society, which will say, I'm sorry, this does not pass the muster of news. Example, in Canada, we have something called the CRTC Commission. The commission sits down and gives licenses or takes away licenses, or says, this is not how you can merge. Organizations and news channels cannot merge. You cannot be too aligned with a political party. And really solid ways of determining news. Anyways, so
No,
there
fact of
was
the
a
matter is, forgive me interrupting, but it is true that the media, perhaps around the world, except in communist countries, where they're beholden to the state, but the media is owned largely by private corporations. And private corporations also have their agendas. And while it is not as overt in certain countries, the fact is they all have an agenda. I was shocked, and I've lived in America for a number of years. What news do the Americans really get from television? Long before the sensational stuff started, what news do they get? CNN was the only 24-hour news channel. The rest, CBS, NBC, ABC, maybe had 2 hours of some local news, something happening around the communities, and then maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, maximum an hour of international news and big national news in America. So at that time, I thought India was far better informed country because vibrant debating so many vibrant issues, covering so much news, albeit India focused, but America didn't even have that. And I said, this is the reason why Americans don't know so much of what is happening in the world, because nobody's telling them. Right. And there were so many places in America you couldn't get the BBC. And also CNN America is different to CNN International, because CNN America is much more local focused. They don't have as many international stories. So America also had for all its great wealth and freedom and information and, land of the free, land of the brave, that gives people right to say everything, know everything. They knew very little. And India was the one that had these vibrant channels in all the languages. Not enough people tune into news as a category in India. This pie isn't very big. And then in that pie, there's this fight for who gets the biggest TRPs. And then the people that make it sensational get the biggest TRPs. And yet, there will be a kind of backlash against this, because TRPs aren't the only thing. I consider, you want your product seen on a channel that has so much negativity, so much shouting, so much conflict, such bad vibes. Do you really want your product on there? Because TRPs are not the only thing. There is a certain thing as brand placement. There is a certain thing of the brand image. I've been in advertising. I began my career there. And these things will begin to affect it. I do believe that, the modern corporation should really think about supporting the media in a more active way if they really want a free press in India. Because in the old days, like the Renaissance period, all the arts of Europe were funded by the nobility of Europe, the Medicis, that funded the Renaissance virtually. Today, the Medicis are the corporations. And if the corporations have a desire to see a healthy democracy in the country, which I'm sure they do, then they should put their money where their mouth is and put more advertising on news channels, and maybe allow news channels to charge more, because they have to be viable. You're right, it costs money to run a good news channel. And I think they should have those resources. Now, in England, of course, they did a very clever thing. They created a license fee, which everybody around the country has to pay, and they've created the BBC. So the BBC has got its funds, enough funds to create a world-class service, not only for England, but for around the world. And I dare say that the BBC World Service is better than the BBC News you see in England, because they have become the standard bearers of what is happening internationally. You believe them, they're credible, they bring you stories. They have their biases too. I've seen them do some anti-India reports which are most unfair, And yet, overall, it's a fair news organization. And I think we should empower such news organizations. You set up one when it first came on the air. I think you did a fabulous job there. You created a landmark news service that is now running even without your presence. But the fact is, you set up the whole structure, the whole field teams, the whole systems of news, and it was a massive social service. And I think it's one of the best channels on the Indian news media today. So there is need for more like that. And I hope people come to you and ask you to open more channels like that, because that's the need of the hour.
No, and so Kabir, one of the other things that one of the big challenges that exists is ground reportage, and news cannot happen without ground reportage. Armchair
Right.
journalism is like armchair anthropology, right? We can have our great opinions, and we obviously will share our experiences as we talk and discuss. But news reportage has to happen from the ground and ground up, and that's something which is massively missing across media because it's an expensive task. And I think that's where the biggest change needs to be seen. And more sooner we realize, we'll possibly have a better world, a better understanding of what's going on. When you can sit on a studio and can scream and shout and say whatever you want to say and then get away with it, that doesn't make sense. And so credibility will come possibly when more ground reportage begins to happen.
Right.
Now,
Right.
Kabir, tell me, as you move out towards, going towards more responsible existences within our lives, do you see something that the world and, people need to do to fix our world? Because we've found tremendous gaps where we couldn't hold the population that was on the edges. It's fallen and it's continuing to fall through the gaps. It's going to continue falling for another year. You talked about unrest possibilities. Do you think there is something that needs to be done right away to hold the people who are falling through the cracks up there?
Individuals like this tend to feel helpless. You think, what can I do? What difference will I make, really? That's for the government to sort out. And it is. It's something the government should sort out. That's what they elected to do. But it solve all the problems. Therefore, what individuals can do is decide the cause or the thing that matters to you the most and do something about it, even if little. Because the question of, individual effort does make a difference. And there are countless causes. They say, if you think something small can't matter, you have never spent a room in a night with a noisy mosquito. Even the smallest things can make a big difference. And therefore, if you care about starvation in India, just make a little extra, go feed somebody hungry. You don't have to join great organizations. Just do a little. If you feel passionately about a cause, I'm involved in two causes. One is Sight Savers India, which is helping the visually challenged. And also there's another one called Care and Share Italia, where people raise money in Italy to take street children from school all the way to university. So these are causes that matter to me, and I'm giving my time and attention to them. I can't take on all the causes. I'm asked to join so many charities. I can't do it. I have to choose what I can do and try and make a real difference where I can do. And I think that's true of everybody. If you feel that you care about, there's a vast array of things you can choose, but let me just simplify this and say, if you care about social justice or the judiciary, just start campaigning, start writing letters, start agitating, saying, let's get a better judiciary. Find the groups that do, join them, empower them. But don't just sit back and expect it to be done for you. social activism is important as long as it's constructive social activism. I always say it's important to be concerned about things, but make sure it is in the direction of progress. For instance, I am totally, I love nature. I go there whenever I'm in moments of crisis. I go into nature, and nature gives me all the answers.
Mhm.
But at the same time, when I see environmentalists opposing the cutting down of a few trees, which is not even 0.0 in Bombay, that'll give Bombay a metro shed, that'll give it connectivity, etc., etc. I'm saying this is misplaced idea. There is a larger picture. There is a larger picture and larger well-being that's involved.
Right.
And there's nothing that can't be replaced in that sense. So there's a lot of misguided activism, and I'm saying never be part of misguided activism or activism that doesn't take the larger picture and the larger good. Cities expand, it needs infrastructure. Something's going to have to give way to create a new road. So
Right.
activism, do a little, because every little bit does count. And you'd be surprised at how many incredible groups there are in this country that are doing phenomenal work. I know from the charities that I work with, but editor of a magazine called Social Welfare. And this was the magazine, a government magazine, that gave a picture of what was happening on the social welfare scene. Now, she wasn't she was editor. She would get onto trains and go down to the smallest village to see what's happening. And she'd take me with her. She said, you will learn more with me than you will in your classroom. And in these villages, you found the most incredible, selfless people, helping other people, doing things for other people. These aren't rich people. These aren't people but they give their time, they're caring, they built things for each other, they help people fill out forms for government things, they took children to school where the parents couldn't take children to school. This kind of caring and social caring by unknown heroes in the most smallest villages has always stayed with me. Has always stayed with me. And one thing I say to everybody, for all the activism you do, for all the causes you believe in, think about the little people in your life, the people
Very
around you.
important point. Very important point, Kabir, is that we
Kind
make
of
up talking
passion.
about the large picture, the tiny things that you need to look after. A
That's what I'm
computer
saying.
that you may provide, the food that you may provide to a family as a group,
Yeah.
and just think about the small things that you can do around you. Kabir,
Yeah.
the last question.
Sure.
Tell me a bit about love. You told us a
Love.
beautiful story about your mom and dad, but tell me about love.
Having been married 4 times, divorced 3 times, I'm not the greatest authority on love. Or perhaps that does make me an authority. I'm not sure which. All I will say is that I am the eternal romantic. I do believe in love. That is why I keep getting married, because I believe that this is a love that's going to last, and I want it to last. And I must say, before I come to the subject of love, one of the things I'm really proud of is that I'm still friends with my ex-wives. We're all friends. And to keep that going, despite the fact that we couldn't make the marriage work, I regard as one of my rare achievements. But I do believe in the importance of love, the power of love, the power of caring and sharing and companionship. And it might have not worked for a lifetime with certain people, but at the end of it, if you finally find something that works for you, it's a very empowering feeling, because as Gandhi said, love is the subtlest force in the universe. It's something that, if it's there, its influence on you is always positive. It's always something that makes you feel, that gives a new meaning to life. things look different. And, the nature of love changes. The love of those beginning life is one, the love of those at the end of their life is another. But there is a certain vibration. And if that's there, then it is a source of great richness. And if it's not there, you miss it, you lack it. And, love is again one of those words that has so many meanings, because it can be the love of a mother and a child, it can be the love of relatives, it can be love of country, it can be love of religion. But love in itself is a beautiful energy. And when it's shared between two people, I think it empowers both.
Well, very beautifully said, Kabir. And I want to take that thought of yours as I close this beautiful conversation with you. We, as the world, need to look at love as the concept. We cannot be, surrounded by this idea of hate and putting each other down, trying to push each other out of places. We need to figure out how important peace is going to be in creating a better world. We are three things I always say for civilization that you need. You need health, food, and education. And if you can't provide these three things to your people and to the rest of the global community, you possibly are not in the right direction. And if conflagration and conflict is your way to go, then you possibly will never have peace and never have love. Thank you very much, Kabir, for joining me for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you. I just want to add one thing. From the point of view of people, kindness is the most important virtue on this planet. It contains everything.
Thank you, Kabir. Thank you, and good night and good luck.
Bye.
Bye.